Good evening. Welcome to Practical Conversations, conversations for the life of the church. The life of the church includes not only its proclamation, but also the vibrancy of its people in the promotion and enhancement of the kingdom of God. Practical Conversations intends to engage conversations of practice and theology with persons currently working in the church at various levels and engaged in these issues. Our goal is to both inform and encourage those who are actively seeking to enhance God's kingdom through the use of their gifts. Tonight's conversation centers around parliamentary procedures for the upcoming General Conference, and our guest tonight is Dr. Francis Jackson, the immediate past parliamentarian of the 51st session of the General Conference of the A.M.E. Zion Church. Our discussion tonight is pre-recorded, so we will not be able to take any questions. However, we thank you for joining us tonight for this conversation. Dr. Jackson, welcome to Practical Conversations.
Broadnax, it is such a pleasure to see you since we are strong Facebook friends discussing hockey and baseball most of the time. Nothing
Now,
so
you know your
lofty.
past. Well, first of all, we need to say that Dr. Jackson and I are members, or I grew up in her home church, is my home church, John Wesley, Detroit. She has known me literally all of my life.
That's true.
Now,
That is true.
your pastor is going to be watching to see that we stay on topic tonight.
My pastor is getting married and he has bigger fish to
Oh,
fry.
he's got much bigger fish to fry.
Fine young man. Fine young man.
We're
He's been
happy
a
to
real
have
shame.
you tonight. We're here tonight to discuss 10 common mistakes of parliamentary procedures so that we might be in order at the upcoming General Conference. However, before we get into that, Dr. Jackson, briefly, let's speak about how the General Conference is organized and what must take place before the business of the General Conference really gets into gear.
Okay. Thank you for that question. The membership of the General Conference has to be reestablished at every General Conference. Once one General Conference adjourns, is gone. Everything falls to the floor. So the membership has to be reestablished every time the General Conference convenes. And that is done by the adoption of 3 reports. And they must be adopted in a very strict order. The first report is the report of the Credentials Committee because it tells us not only who is here, but the voting strength. And that's important because if we have a counted vote that is higher than
Yeah.
what the voting strength that has been reported, we got to stop the presses and get an update on the credentials report. So the very first report that must be adopted is the report of the Credentials Committee. And that report will be presented at every succeeding business session. It is timed and dated. So what they will say is, this is the credentials report as of July 25th at 9:30 a.m. Now, if you arrive as a delegate after that report, you have full power to vote, to participate, everything, but you'll be part of the next credentials report. The second report that must be adopted is the report of the standing rules. This tells us how we will function. So,
Mhm.
for example, it will say that you can speak for 2 minutes, no more than 2 times on every motion. Only voting delegates can sit in a particular uh, area. Put your electronic devices on mute or vibrate. It will tell us how to function. And the third and final report that must be adopted is adoption of the convention program. That tells us what we're going to be doing.
Mhm.
An adoption of the convention program is not just a business agenda, it's everything: banquets, workshops, luncheons, the whole agenda of the General Conference. Once those 3 reports are adopted, now the General Conference is open for the transaction of business.
Thank you. Yes, yes. And we often forget that before we can even hear the reports, the Episcopal or the quadrennial reports,
Right.
we have to have a delegation that's seated in a program that's
Yes.
approved. Yes,
Yes.
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 All right, let's get into parliamentary procedures. Number one on our list, I feel like Letterman. Number one on our list, how do we make motions?
Thank you so much. The proper way to make a motion is to say, I move that or I move to. Improper, I motion. Improper, I want to make a motion. Those are bad. Proper, I move that or I move to.
I
When the
so move, Mr. Chairman.
no, you don't sow nothing. I move that or I move to. When the presiding officer states that motion, it is moved and seconded, not properly seconded. Every time someone says that, the thought goes to my mind. As opposed to what? Improperly seconded? It is moved and seconded. And when the presiding officer says, are you ready for the question? Please stop saying question. Y'all sit there and say question. You don't need to say anything. If you want to participate in debate, get up and go to a mic. But please stop saying question. When the officer calls for the vote, those in favor say aye, those opposed say no, not nay, no. And don't say use the same sign.
Mm.
So the proper way to make a motion is I move that or I move to.
All right, all right. And please do not say so moved,
Please.
please. Number two, voting. How, oh, excuse me. What about abstentions, or what is the basis for a vote? How many people are in the room? How do
Right.
we vote?
So when the presiding officer says those in favor say aye, those opposed say no, under no circumstances should he ask for abstentions. People who are abstaining are not voting. When you abstain, you're basically saying, I'm not voting on this. We don't need to count that.
Mm.
When you count the abstentions, you're basically saying, everybody who's not voting, please raise your hand. Doesn't that sound stupid? It is
Mm.
stupid. What do you care? People have the right not to vote. Now, if there are 1,000 delegates in the room, 2,000, 3,000, and 9 people vote in favor and 1 votes opposed, that motion is carried.
Mm.
Let me repeat that. If there are 1,000 people in the room, 2,000, 3,000, 10,000, and 9 people vote aye, and 1 person votes no, that motion is adopted. The motion is carried on the number of people who vote, not the number of people in the room. It is based on the number of people who vote. So you may look around and you only see 9 hands go up for aye and 1 for no, and you say, oh, that motion failed. No, it didn't. That motion passed. Now, I said you have the right not to vote. Technically, that's true. But the General Conference is a delegate-driven meeting. We don't have 1.5 million Zionites at the General Conference.
Mm-hmm.
You have delegate representation. And there is a formula, as you well know, by which the lay and ministerial delegates are elected.
Mm-hmm.
So you are here representing a constituency. And for you not to vote is really a dereliction of duty.
Mm.
And if I'm a member if I'm watching the General Conference and I see my delegate not voting, we're going to have something to talk about. You on your phone texting or on your iPad playing Subway Surfers, or you on your social media. We sent you to the conference to vote. We can't all be there. We sent you there. And you need to vote. However, Whether you vote or not, the vote is carried on the number of people who vote, not the number of people who are present in the room. That's why not voting is such an important thing.
Mm.
It's important because it really does affect the outcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Number 3, when can an alternate replace a delegate?
Yeah, this is a toucher. I think this topic got me in trouble with Bishop Moore. I'm not sure. He's such a gentleman, and he's
When you go ahead, I'll text him and tell him not to watch this.
you're gonna contact him so you can talk about the Mets. So Roberts is very clear. An alternate can only replace a delegate if that delegate is leaving the convention and not coming back.
Mm.
An alternate cannot replace the delegate because that delegate is going to lunch with her sorority sisters or fraternity brothers or with their Livingstone class, or your son is in
But we make
town and you.
exceptions for blue bears.
Well, Uncle Henry doesn't know about blueberries, so he did not put that in that book. And the reason this is important and the reason I'm making a big deal out of it is this. My first words to you had to do with the Credentials Committee, right?
Mhm.
And what did I tell you? That they're responsible for knowing the voting membership of the General Conference, right? So if you're making your private arrangements between you and a delegate to sit in for you at this time and sit in for you at another time, if there is an objection or a challenge to an election, and the Credentials Committee has to vouch for who voted,
Mm.
how can they do that if alternates and delegates are running back and forth?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why Robert says, look, the alternate can only take the place of the delegate if the delegate is leaving permanently. And what the delegate and alternate need to do is to go to the Credentials Committee together and say, strike the name of Francis Jackson and insert the name of Reginald Broadnax. Francis Jackson is now a delegate. Now, having said all that, I recognize that sometimes what is in Roberts is not practical for
Mhm.
every situation. And what Bishop Moore brought up, which I think is important, is that when the Episcopal Committee is meeting, the alternates sit in place of the delegate. Now, I don't know if they do this for other committee meetings or at other times or other committees, but he mentioned the Episcopal Committee specifically. And what I said to him, hopefully respectfully, Bishop, why are we scheduling committee meetings when the General Conference is in session? Why would we do that? All that time y'all got, and you're going to schedule a committee meeting while the business is being carried on? As a parliamentarian, I don't understand that. But look, the issue is if you don't want to do what Robert says, you can always have your own rule. Always. Here's the caveat. If you decide to go your own way, that's fine. And it's not wrong. It's not horrible. It's not bad. But you can't deviate from Roberts and then run into a problem and ask Roberts how to solve it.
Mhm.
If you want your own rule that says alternates can replace delegates temporarily and under what circumstances, and there's a challenge to the election, don't ask Uncle Henry what to do about it.
Yeah.
You can do your own thing, but make sure your own thing covers all of
Well,
the dotted I's and crossed T's. So if you're an alternate and you're asked by a delegate to take the place of the delegate, just my personal opinion, at a minimum, whoever is the president of your delegation needs to know that Francis is leaving for a couple of hours and Reginald Broadnax is going to be taking her place. Somebody besides the two of you
yeah.
need to know that the alternate is voting in place of the delegate. But the important thing is If this is what the General Conference wants, they need to adopt a rule. You don't just deviate from your parliamentary authority. Adopt a rule so everybody knows that this is occurring and under what circumstances it will happen.
Okay. Number 4, how do we handle financial reports? Do we adopt auditors' reports? Do we adopt unaudited reports? How do we handle financial reports?
So, financial reports are special. And I know I will talk about reports separately, but financial reports are special. At a minimum, the financial officers must report orally the ending balance for all accounts for which they're responsible. Now, that oral recitation goes in the minutes. That's very important. There is absolutely no motion that should be made to adopt unaudited financial reports. And I'm saying to all of Zion, please stop adopting, accepting unaudited financial reports. Your treasurer walks into the meeting with a sheet of paper they generated, and they say, well, this is how much money you have. And y'all sit there and say, I move we accept. You don't know whether that report is wrong or after what we've been through in Zion. I'm not going to enumerate it.
No, don't enumerate.
Practical conversation. But I've been the parliamentarian for the General Conference since 1996. So I've been through some stuff. And there's no question in my mind that some of the people who did some things that were not necessarily in order, that they presented faulty financial reports, phony financial reports. The reason you adopt the auditor's report is that the auditor has done what? Gotten the financial statements, gotten the bank statements, gotten the receipt book, gotten the canceled checks. They've gotten all the financial records. And the auditor has checked that if you received $500,000, that there's a deposit for $500,000. So what will happen is this. The treasurer, chief financial officer, will say, this is the ending balance. Now, he can do more than that. They can say beginning balance. They can say total receipts, total, but at a minimum, they have to report the ending balance. And then for those accounts that have been audited, he then will read the last paragraph of the auditor's report, which generally has a statement that this is a fair representation of the liability and assets of blah, 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 blah. He then will step back, and the bishop will entertain a motion to adopt the auditor's report. And after that, you can ask any questions you want about anything. Now, if it is not an audited financial report, no motions will be made. None. The bishop will say, without a motion, the report will be filed for audit. Now, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. But after all the questions have been asked, no motion is made if it's not been audited, and the bishop will simply state the report will be filed for audit. A financial review is not an audit. If it's a financial review, it still must be filed for audit. Stop. And I'm not just talking about the General Conference. Stop doing it at the district conference. Stop doing it at the annual conference. Stop doing it at your missionary meeting. Stop doing it at your usher board meeting. Stop doing it at your choir meeting. Stop adopting unaudited financial reports. And if you have not been getting your finances audited, that's a huge mistake. I don't care how little money you have enough for somebody to steal. And let me tell you what we do in Zion. Someone is the treasurer for the last 25 years. They've been the treasurer of the Life Members Council for 20 years, and you've never had the books audited. That's stupid. That's stupid. That's stupid. I could tell you some stories. I'm not going to, but it is not smart. I hope I was sufficiently emphatic.
Yeah. All right, number 6, amending a motions. What is the proper way to amend a motion?
Yeah, I sort of hesitated putting that on the list because it's complicated. So I need people to listen carefully.
Okay.
Let's take a simple example. Let's say there is a motion to have a picnic on July 11th at Edgewater Park.
Okay.
Picnic, July 11th, Edgewater Park. There are 3 elements in that main motion: the event, which is the picnic, the date, July 11th, and the place.
Right.
You don't want to go to Edgewater Park. You don't like it. That bathroom stink. Half the stuff is broken. It's just not a nice place. You amend words by doing one of 3 things. Either add or insert. Add is putting it at the end of the sentence. Insert is in the middle.
Yeah, okay.
Secondly, strike out, just getting rid of something. Or third, an indivisible combination of strike out and insert. Now, you don't want to go to Edgewater. So you move to amend that motion by striking out Edgewater and inserting Kensington Park.
Mm.
Now, that's the primary amendment. And that primary amendment must be germane, it must relate to the main motion. In other words, you can't say, I move we participate in the Susan G. Komen Race for the Cure. That's not germane to that main motion. That main motion is about having a picnic on July 11th at Edgewater Park. So the primary amendment must be germane, must relate to the main motion. So you've made your amendment. I move to amend the motion by striking out Edgewater Park and inserting Kensington Park. And that motion must be seconded. I don't want to go to Edgewater or Kensington. I want to go to Metro Parkway. So I propose a secondary amendment to strike out Kensington and insert Metro Parkway. That secondary amendment must be germane, must relate to the primary amendment. The primary amendment has to be germane, relate to the main motion. The secondary amendment has to relate to the primary amendment. So in other words, if the primary amendment is to strike out Edgewater and insert Kensington, I can't move to strike out the date and insert July 18th. Mm-hmm. I have to talk about the place. Now, there can be no further amendments. You can have a primary amendment and a secondary. You can't have a tertiary. So let's say the motion to strike out Kensington and insert Metro Parkway fails. It loses. Now we're back to the primary amendment, which is to strike out Edgewater and insert Kensington. Mm-hmm. And let's say that amendment is adopted. Now the main motion as amended is to have a picnic July 11th at Kensington Park. Adopting the amendment does not adopt the main motion as amended. Let me repeat that. Adopting the amendment to strike out Edgewater and insert Kensington does not adopt that main motion. We still have to vote on the main motion now as amended. So let's say now the main motion is to have a picnic July 11th at Kensington Park. Now that's the main motion. Mm-hmm. If somebody wants to change the date, because there are no pending amendments anymore, now they can move a new primary amendment to strike out July 11th and insert July 18th. But they could not do that because the primary amendment had to deal with the place. Now, to me, this is not that complicated, but when I present it, people's eyes glass over, they get a confused look on their face, and they're clearly not sure what I'm talking about. So as you're listening to the explanation I gave, what is your take on it? Does it seem clear to you, or is there something more I need to explain?
It seems clear to me, but it raises a separate question. What is a substitute motion?
A substitute motion is not for words. Substitute motions are for paragraphs. So you have, let's say we have presented a proposal for, let's say we want to change the way delegates are elected,
Mm-hmm.
and we have written a whole new paragraph on how that is to be done, and you think it's stupid, or maybe stupid's not the best word. Maybe you don't think it's complete.
Okay.
Rather than going through and striking out here and inserting there and striking out here and inserting there and striking out here, you say, I move to substitute. Because you have so many changes that doing the strikeout and insert would be awkward and unwieldy. So
Okay.
when you have a lot of changes you want to make to a proposed amendment, that's a paragraph, rather than taking us through strikeout and insert, strikeout and insert, strikeout and insert, strikeout, strikeout, strikeout. You say, I move to substitute. And you're substituting a paragraph. It may have some of the elements of the paragraph you're substituting, but it's going to have substantial changes in it. And therefore, that's why it's a substitute. So substitution is used when you are amending a paragraph, not just words.
So paragraph, 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs.
It could be a whole chapter.
Okay. And then amending is simply just striking out and replacing it with something different.
It could be any number of things. Let's use another example. Let's say there's a motion to buy a new conference table. Now, I think we need chairs. So I move to amend by adding and 12 chairs.
Okay.
Now, maybe you think that doesn't have to be new. So you move to strike out new. So it only says buy a conference table. Or maybe you feel it should be oak. You like oak. So instead of just saying new, you say new, you move to amend by inserting the word oak so that it'll read new oak conference table.
Mm-hmm.
So adding is at the end and 12 chairs. Inserting is in the body. Insert the word oak. Strike out, you're getting rid of something altogether. We're going to strike out new and just say buy a conference table. Or indivisible, strike out and insert. Instead of saying new, strike out new and insert oak.
Okay.
Now, if it's a paragraph, then you don't have strike out and insert, you have substitute.
Okay. Okay. The good thing about this meeting is that a person can watch it several times to make sure that they get their understanding.
Well, look, let me just say this. Remember, the main motion, the primary amendment, must relate to that motion. The secondary amendment must relate to the primary amendment. So in the example I gave you, because the primary amendment was about getting rid of Edgewater and inserting Kensington, the secondary amendment has to be about the place. It can't be about the date or the event. Now, once those amendments are voted up or down, and we're back to the main motion, either as amended or not amended, now you can have a new primary amendment to strike out July 11th and insert July 18th. And one last thing I need to say about that. Once you have voted on an amendment, whether it's to vote it up or down, it is subject to the settled rule, which means we can't go back there. That matter is settled.
All right. So while we're talking about amending things, how do we amend a budget?
So the budget is special. And the budget is special because one of the things the presiding officer is supposed to do when a motion is made is tell us what is the effect of adopting that motion. Let's go back to the example I just gave on amending. Let's say that the motion to amend by striking out Edgewater and inserting Kensington is adopted. And let's say that main motion as amended is adopted. The presiding officer would then say, Motion is adopted. We will have a picnic on July 11th at Kensington Park. Now, that sounds pretty simple and straightforward when you're talking about having a picnic. But when you're talking about the budget, what you do in one place has an effect someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's say, for example, that the budget for the Midwest Episcopal area is $500,000. And someone gets up and says, I move to amend the budget by striking out 500,000 and inserting 450,000.
Mm-hmm.
What is the effect of doing that? Does it reduce the contingency by 50,000? Or if we have a budget that is zero sum, where it's, let's say, 2 million in and 2 million out,
Mm-hmm.
you can't just take away $50,000 and say we're going to be $50,000 in the red. You've got to have some cognizance of where that money's coming from, or whether or not you're going to say, I move that we strike out 50,000 from Midwest and reduce that to 450 and increase Piedmont by 50,000.
Yeah, let's do that. Increase Piedmont.
Now, a third option, I don't like it, but a third option is to say, I move that we reduce the budget for Midwest by 50,000 and that the budget committee will report back on, if this motion is adopted, on where that money will come from. Now, you could do that. That's not really, kosher, but you can. The point that I want delegates to understand is that when you're doing the budget, you can't just strike out money and not account for what effect that's going to be. If there is contingency and it can come from contingency, then you can say that will reduce contingency from 100,000 to 50,000. And that takes care of it if the delegates agree. But the budget is different because what happens on one line has an effect on that bottom line. And someone's got to pay attention to that. And if the delegate doesn't say it, I will be saying to the bishops, you have to say it.
Yeah.
You have to say, if this motion is adopted, it will put the quadrennial budget in the red by $50,000. If this motion is adopted, it will reduce contingency by $50,000. Somebody has to say what is the result of adopting this motion.
Now, I doubt it would happen. It would be a rare instance if it does. But if the same is true, if it's true that reducing has an effect, if someone makes a motion to increase the budget of Midwest by 50,000, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. We couldn't just have an extra 50,000 sitting around in the budget.
You could, but you've got to say where that 50,000 is going to sit.
Okay.
Where's it sitting? It's sitting around where? Is it in contingency? Are you going to put it in our colleges and schools? Where's it going to sit? The budget is different because it's like taking a brick out. Something happens. Trying to put another brick in. Something happens. And what I've observed is that people don't come prepared to talk about the effect of adopting their motion. They're not prepared to do that. They just want their budget reduced.
Right.
Well, okay, fine. But you've got to tell us what is the effect of doing that.
Okay. All right. Number 8. I have a point of order.
Yes. So point of order is what a person says when they believe there's been a breach in the rules. And those rules could be Robert's Rules of Order. It could be the standing rules that were adopted at the beginning of the convention. It could be something in the discipline. For example, the bishops have no vote. They can't vote.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they all know that. Which is the group that has to be reminded about that? the newly elected bishops.
Yeah.
You just got elected to the episcopacy. You're escorted to the stage with the fanfare and the families and all this. You sit on the stage and you continue voting. Sorry, Charlie. Now that you can wear a purple shirt, you can't vote. So you believe there's been a breach in the rules. And the motion you make is point of order. This is an interrupting motion. It is rude by design. It interrupts whoever is speaking. It doesn't matter who it is, whether it's the presiding bishop or anybody. It is an interrupting motion. And the reason it is allowed to be a rude interrupting motion is that if you don't bring up the break in the rule when it happens, it's too late afterwards. Let me give you a quick example. Let's say a motion has been made and it wasn't seconded, but we start debating it. 15 minutes later, you go to the mic and say, point of order. And what the presiding bishop should say is, please state your point. You see, this motion was not seconded. This whole discussion is out of order. Once we start debate, the fact that it wasn't seconded is too bad. It should have been raised at the time debate started. Once we start debate, the fact that the motion was not seconded is too late. Now, there are some breaches of a continuing nature that are not dependent on that. One of those would be elections. So if someone, let's say in September or October, someone who lost an election by 7 votes finds out that 7 alternates voted who had no business voting, they can upend the election because that's a breach of a continuing nature. Now, there are only a very, very few of those, but that would be one. So point of order is what you say when there's been a breach in the rule. Someone has made a mistake. They're violating a rule, whether that's Robert's Rules of Order, the standing rules that you adopted, or rules that are in the discipline about how we function. It is an interrupting motion. You interrupt who is speaking. And I know some people are really bothered by that. But the presiding officer stops what they're saying, or they stop the person who is speaking, and they say, please state your point of order. And then they rule on whether the point of order is well taken or not well taken. If it's well taken, they're saying, you're right. There was a breach, and they take corrective action. If they say it's not well taken, they have to give the reason why they think it's not well taken. And if you disagree with that, you can do an appeal from the decision of the chair.
Okay.
Because the final decision maker in all cases is the General Conference. Nobody overrules the GC. When that presiding bishop says, after those 3 reports are adopted, the 55th quadrennial session of the A.M.E. Zion Church General Conference is open, the most powerful entity in this church is the General Conference.
And if I wanted to appeal the chair, I would move for, I would make a motion to appeal the ruling of the chair.
I appeal from the decision of the chair. And in an appeal, you're basically saying, I think you're wrong. Everybody gets to speak one time. The chair gets to speak twice. Generally, the chair speaks first and the chair speaks last. Now, it has to be on a debatable motion. If it is a motion, it has to be a debatable motion. If the motion is not debatable, then the appeal is not debatable. But if it's a debatable motion, an appeal is made on that, then the chair will speak first, and then other people speak one time, and then the chair speaks last. And the motion that the chair will put is those who wish to sustain the decision of the chair will vote yes. Those who do not wish to sustain the decision of the chair will vote no. You always put the motion in such a way that voting yes supports the chair. Now, if the motion is carried, then it says the chair is right and the member is wrong. If if the motion for that is lost, then the people are saying the chair is wrong and the member is right. And that means we're going to do what the member wanted done. But the terminology is, I appeal from the decision of the chair.
Okay. Okay. And we raised that when we're speaking of points of order, but we can appeal the decision of the chair in any point of business of the General Conference as long as the motion is debatable.
You can, but the point of order makes it clear what the issue is. The point of order is where you have your chance as a member to say, I think you're wrong, and I think this is where you're wrong. If you just have an appeal without that, I'm not sure how you present what your position is.
Okay. Okay. All right. Now, I'm listening to a report, a debate on the floor. I'm really not sure what the issue is, or I'm lost someplace. How do I ask for information? How do I make a point, or is there such a thing as a point of information?
There's a request for information. And request for information can be an interrupting motion. And the chair would say, please state your request. After they listen to the request, they can rule that it is not urgent and should not interrupt, and you need to go sit down and come back. Or they can say, this is urgent, we need to answer this right now. So request for information is when you want a question answered. It's not when you want to give information. It's when you want someone to give information to you. You have a question about something, and you're concerned about something you're not understanding or something you think is missing. It's not point of information anymore. They got rid of that. It's request for information.
And it can only be on the topic that is currently being discussed. You can't go back to a motion that was made 10 minutes ago.
I would agree with that with this caveat. Because in convention, people have to walk a long way to get to a microphone. Some people have to go the distance. You may have been trying to get out of your row and get into the aisle that has a microphone. And as long as it is clear that that person was attempting to get to the microphone to raise that, my advice to the presiding bishop will be, you need to go ahead and take that. Because sometimes, depending on where a person is sitting, they may have had that point, and it just took them some time to get out of their row, get into the aisle that has a mic, and then do their request. So you sort of got to look at the situation and say, it's just like if someone wants to be recognized before debate is cut off, but they've got to get up and get out. As long as you can see that that person is trying to get to the mic, you really owe it to them to give them that opportunity.
Okay. All right. So now, but if the motion is already passed, are we still trying to get information on something that's already?
You could have a request for information on a motion that's been adopted. It could be, I'm not really clear on what this means. I have a request for information. What is the bottom line of what this means of that motion we just adopted? What's the bottom line of that? And something like that happened in real life. I was the parliamentarian when we rescinded the rule that the bishop is the husband of one wife. Mm-hmm. And I can remember someone saying, they didn't say it like a request for information. They said, I have a question. Does this mean that at the next general conference, people who've been divorced 2 and 3, 4 or 5 times can run for bishop? And the answer was yes. Mm-hmm. And they did.
Yeah.
Now y'all put it back in.
Yeah.
But for that one little window,
mm-hmm.
you could have 2 wives, living wives, or 3, or 4 or 5 and run for bishop. Now, y'all didn't elect nobody who had that, had that background. You didn't elect them, but they were eligible to run. They were eligible to run.
Okay.
So someone wanted to, someone had that. So yes, you could have a request for information that's legitimate on a motion that has already been adopted.
Okay. The chair would be the one to rule whether or not that request for information should go forward or should be answered.
No, you if it's a request for information, you got to give them an answer.
Okay.
The chair would rule on whether or not it is of sufficient importance that it can interrupt what is going on. That is what they would say, because
Okay.
there are a couple of requested inquiries that can be interrupting, but not necessarily. So, for example, parliamentary inquiry. A parliamentary inquiry could be an interrupting motion, but it doesn't have to be.
Mm-hmm.
And the chair would have the right to say, while your parliamentary inquiry is legitimate, it is not urgent. So we will continue with this, and then the chair will address your
Yes.
parliamentary inquiry. So that's the leeway the chair, whoever is presiding, would have.
Okay. Well, our final question for tonight is that I want to stop debate. All right. I want to call for the previous question. How do I do that?
Okay. That is also not an interrupting motion. Not and it amuses me that one person thinks they can stop a whole room full of people from talking by saying, I call the question from their seat. I'm sorry, Charlie. You don't have that kind of power. It is not an interrupting motion. And 2 people must want debate to end, because that motion has to be seconded. So you go to the mic, and once you're recognized, you say, I call the previous question. And somebody doesn't have to be at the mic. They can be in their seat. They say second. Now, the motion to call the previous question is non-debatable and non-amendable. You can't debate it. You can't amend it. There are motions that are non-debatable but can be amended. Limit debate is the motion. You can't debate it, but you can amend it.
Okay.
The motion to call the previous question can be debated or amended. So the chair does not ask, are you ready for the question? Because there's no debate in that motion. So you go to the mic and you say, I call the previous question. And someone from their chair says second. And the presiding officer says, the previous question has been called. All those in favor of ending debate, please rise, or lift up your voting card, whatever. Thank you. All those opposed. It requires 2/3 to be adopted. 2/3 of those voting, not 2/3 of those who are in the room, but 2/3 of those voting. And if the motion to call the previous question is adopted, we immediately go to the pending motion and vote on it. No more debate, no more comment. If you didn't get your comment in, that's too bad.
So if I call for previous, or if I'm recognized to call for previous question, no one else can run to the mic.
Not at that point. Now, there are a couple of motions that have higher proceedings than call the previous question. I just can't imagine that any of those would be made. So, as a general rule, when a person says, I call the previous question, someone says second, because if it's not seconded, it dies for want of a second. If someone says second, then you immediately go to a vote on the pending motion. If that motion to call the previous question is adopted by 2/3. So you call the previous question, it must be seconded. You vote on whether you want to call the previous question. Those 2 people can't stop it. It has to be voted on, and it requires 2/3 adoption in order to stop debate on the pending motion.
And after we have stopped debate on the pending motion, how do we get the how do we get the previous motion read back to us or remind us of that so that we can know what it is that we just
Yeah.
stopped debate on?
So the presiding officer will say, the motion to call the previous question has been adopted. The question before the assembly is the motion to adopt the budget.
Mhm.
All those in favor, say aye. Those opposed, say no. Or all those in favor, click on the machine or whatever it is, however you're voting. You immediately take the vote on the pending question. But
But
he needs to state it. And one of
okay.
the things that I do for the Board of Bishops is I do meeting scripts for them, in which I give them some assistance on what to say. And one of the things I always say to them is, you have to state the motion repeatedly. People forget what they're voting on.
Mhm.
They forget what you've been arguing so much, they no longer remember what the motion is. So the question before the assembly is the motion to adopt the budget as amended. All those in favor, no more debate. All those in favor, all those opposed, motion carried, motion lost, whatever.
As long as I'm just making clear that we do have an opportunity to remember what it was that we were supposed to be voting on.
The you shouldn't have to remember. The presiding officer should state what the pending question is before you vote on it.
Okay.
The presiding officer has a responsibility to say, this is the pending question.
All right, that covers our top 10 things that we need to be aware of or need to be concerned for at our upcoming General Conference. We apologize that we weren't able to take questions tonight, but we thank Dr. Jackson for coming on tonight and for discussing these matters of parliamentary procedure. I could think of no better person than Dr. Francis Jackson, who is a lifelong member of the John Wesley A.M.E. Zion Church, now in Southfield, Michigan.
Yes.
We thank you so much for joining us tonight for practical conversations. We also ask you to give our best regards to Frank for allowing you to join us tonight and take away some of his precious time.
He's still at the office. You're fine.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Practical Conversations. It was a joy to have you.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it, and I'm glad my internet held up. I'm so relieved.
Yeah. And we will see you in a couple of weeks.
Yes. See you in Greensboro.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Broadnax. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.